Ancient history conceals giants of mystery. One of them is Mount Sinai, the true mountain of God, also known as Horeb or Moses, renowned for its biblical and historical significance. But when the memory faded with time, the real Mount Sinai has been contested for millennia. While there's no definitive answer to this question, scientists have made shocking discoveries that shed light on the secrets regarding the mountain of God. Join us in today's episode of Eyes 200M to find out the shocking discoveries scientists have made on Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, the secluded and mysterious rocky peak where God gave mankind the Ten Commandments, is located somewhere among the remote sand dunes and rugged mountain terrains of the Middle East. Since the time they were given, these 10 pearls of respect, as we often refer to them here in Israel, formed the backbone of every civilization that was to leave a positive mark on humanity. Respect God. Respect His name. Respect His day. Respect your mother and your father. Respect the truth. Respect your neighbor. Respect your neighbor's wife. Respect your neighbor's stuff. Respect yourself. These 10 foundational principles were given to the children of Israel as they emerged from extended slavery and hardship in the land of Egypt, forming the essential moral spine of the new nation that God called Ami, meaning my nation, in the Hebrew language. According to the divine plan, revealed hundreds of years beforehand to Father Abraham, now was the time to launch a new movement in the earth, to bind a nation whose calling was to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Exodus 19, verse 6. This nation's mission was to shed the light of God's revelation and salvation to the pagan nations dwelling in a darkened world. The record of Israel's biblical history offers an honest depiction of the struggles and many failures of God's people. Still, God's testimony and work through the people of Israel shined brightly for thousands of years as they served as an example, both good and bad, to other nations, all the way to Israel's rebirth in our time. And central to Israel's historic calling and purpose were the events that unfolded on Mount Sinai nearly 3,700 years ago, namely, the covenant that was confirmed between God and His people, a covenant that was predicated on the law of Moses, the Torah, which means the instruction. According to rabbinic understanding, the Torah, or instruction that was given by God to Moses to hand down to Israel at Mount Sinai, included 613 rules and regulations addressing everything society needed in order to be successful. These rules for a blessed life included family dynamics, honest business principles, personal hygiene, diet, social structure, education, government, national holidays, and of course prayer, worship, and sacrificial services to God. A special and elaborate tabernacle was erected in the heart of the national camp of Israel's 12 tribes called the Tent of Meeting, where God met the national leaders face to face, and where most of the sacrificial practices took place. The laws and regulations were written down and carefully preserved from generation to generation, and an honest review of Israel's biblical history clearly points to the sad fact that the nation's repeated struggles and failures were always a direct consequence of forsaking God's instructions. And so, Mount Sinai represents a historic and epic reminder of God's original calling for the nation of Israel. As in the biblical account, the dramatic images of God's consuming fire upon the mountaintop and His thundering voice shaking the rocks still resonate throughout Israel's national mindset, reminding the people of their original, and some say, impossible national calling. But can we find the actual location of Mount Sinai today? In fact, the researchers point to some possible locations for the biblical Mount Sinai. Frankly, the most famous location for Mount Sinai is a gigantic granite peak at the south-central region of the Sinai Peninsula between Israel and Egypt, which rises to 7,497 feet or 2,285 meters above sea level. And even though scholars differ as to the exact route the Israelites took during their exodus from Egypt, this location has long been accepted as the actual site by many scholars of the main faith traditions, including Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Regardless, many believed that the real mountain of God must be located in the land of Midian, modern-day Saudi Arabia. Of the various locations proposed, Charles Becket suggested Mount Bagir to the northeast of the Gulf of Aqaba. Aloy Musil and H. Philby point to Jebel al-Manifa near Wadi al-Khrab, and a French scholar, Jean Koenig, has proposed the volcanic peak of Halal Bedra. However, perhaps the most popular, though contested, is the work of the late Ron Wyatt, who added a fourth Midianite possibility, Jebel al-Lawz. This same American researcher also claimed to have discovered the locations of Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the Red Sea crossing, the Ark of the Covenant, and other biblical archaeological treasures. Wyatt's assumption that Mount Sinai is located in the ancient land of Midian is based on his understanding of the text of Exodus 3, verse 1. He assumed that because Moses kept Jethro's flocks, Jethro was a priest of Midian, that meant that the mountain of God that Moses came upon must also be in the land of Midian. After claiming in 1978 to have discovered the Red Sea crossing at Nuwaba in the Gulf of Aqaba, the eastern branch of the Red Sea, Wyatt concluded that the real Mount Sinai must be located east from the path of the miraculous Red Sea crossing, in the territory of western modern-day Saudi Arabia. The best possibility, Wyatt thought, was Jebel al-Lawz because it presented the highest peak in the entire western Saudi Arabian mountain range. In 1984, Wyatt and his two sons illegally crossed into Saudi Arabia to explore and photograph the area. But when they were captured, their films confiscated, and they actually were jailed for 78 days by the Saudis as Israeli spies. Wyatt later returned to Saudi Arabia legally on a mission of treasure hunting, looking for the mountain of God, as well as for Egyptian treasures hidden in the region and the leftovers of Pharaoh's huge army, which he believed could be found at the bottom of the Red Sea. Subsequent delegations and researchers followed in the coming years, producing impressive results, yet these are still speculative and lack definitive and indisputable archaeological proofs. Wyatt's research points to a large pile of granite rocks about a quarter of a mile from the base of the mountain with petroglyphs of bovine, bulls, cows, and oxen on it, quoting a Saudi archaeologist from Rida University as saying that these were Egyptian-style cows and bulls who had never been found anywhere else in Saudi Arabia. Wyatt surmised that this was the great altar of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, and possibly the one mentioned in the golden calf story. Wyatt also pointed to what he believed were remnants of Pharaoh's chariots found at the bottom of the Red Sea facing Jebel al-Lawz, a blackened mountain top indicating the fire of God, a massive split rock with the appearance of a powerful water flow, 12 stone pillars located below the mountain, and other findings which he related to the biblical narrative of the Mount Sinai events. Deuteronomy chapter 9 verse 21 says that there was a brook that descended from the mountain, into which Moses scattered the ashes of the golden calf that he burned down after he descended from Mount Sinai with the tablets of the 10 Commandments. Researchers of the Saudi Arabia site found the markings of a large water flow snaking down the mountainside which appear to start from nowhere. That this ancient watershed, which was filled with large water-polished boulders, is clear evidence of a fast-moving, strong stream that came out of a rock and carved its path down the mountainside. In an arid landscape, this was the miracle they were looking for, and finding a large rock that seemed to be split apart in the middle, they suggested that it could be the rock that Moses struck to bring out water for the thirsty nation. See Exodus chapter 17, verse 6. And Psalm 78, verses 15 to 16. Could this be sufficient evidence to validate the claim that this is the location of the real Mount Sinai? Many scholars argue against this assumption, claiming that the mere photographs are not enough evidence to establish the cause, disputing Wyatt's assumptions of Mount Sinai's location in western Saudi Arabia. Many scholars argue that Mount Sinai must be located outside of the ancient territory of the land of Midian. Their questions are based on the text of Exodus 18, which tells us that Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his family to visit Moses while they were camping at the mountain of God. Exodus 18, verse 27, tells us that following this visit, Moses let his father-in-law depart, and that Jethro went back on his own way to his own land, or Midian, therefore placing Mount Sinai away from the land of Midian. In addition, some biblical scholars suggest that the Apostle Paul, while teaching the Galatian Christians about God's covenants, indicated in Galatians chapter 4, verse 25, that Mount Sinai was in Saudi Arabia, or the land of Midian, which seems to support Wyatt's claims. In the actual text, Paul only says that Mount Sinai is in Arabia, not Saudi Arabia. The fact is that the Galatians reference could be used to support the notion that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia only if the apostle was looking at a modern political map. But it would not be so if he was looking at a first-century Roman map, since, according to ancient travel records, the landmass of Arabia in Paul's time included the Arabian Peninsula, as well as the Sinai Peninsula and northern Egypt. After all, the location of Mount Sinai remains a mystery that has fascinated scholars and religious enthusiasts for centuries. Regardless, the search for the mountain of God also is a reminder of the enduring power and significance of biblical narratives, as well as the challenges and complexities of studying ancient history and geography.